1. Fragments of silicon, not with a whimper, but with a bang.
Greetings and welcome to the first Euro episode of Fragments of Silicon. It's been a while since we've done
For
one.
this season on Twitch.
Yes, thank you. It's like, we haven't done one since last season, which has been a while. Like what, 2 months? Anyway,
something like that.
Anyway, well, we are here once again, and joining us on the program again, I think, what is this, time number 4? Like, getting a lot of familiar faces. But anyway, we are happy to welcome back on the program Phil Elliott of Square Enix Europe and the Square Enix Collective.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going fine. How are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, it's been a super busy start to the year. I'm very happy to be one of your emerging familiar faces. That's a great honor for me.
Oh, thank you. And we are always glad to have you on the program. It's like, and let's see, where to start? Because there's always so much to cover. I think we should start with the Turing test. At least, I'm wondering, has it done well for you in the 6 or 7 months since it's been released?
Yeah, it was really pleasing actually. It was probably the first game in which everything came together as we planned it. So just to sort of step back a little bit for anybody who's not familiar with Collective, we started publishing games last year. Before that, we were really about helping teams to build community and supporting Kickstarter projects. So moving from that onto publishing is quite a big jump. Now, it probably sounds strange me saying that because obviously Square Enix is a publisher, so we're used to publishing games, and I think that's a fair assumption to make. But it's obviously very different when you have huge IPs like Final Fantasy and Tomb Raider and Hitman and so on. With big studios dedicated to them. What we're doing with much smaller indie teams is a very different process. We're sort of trying to find different types of market. We're working with different levels of budget, and in truth, you have different skills and different approaches that you need to make as a result. So we had to test a lot of things. With the first game was quite a tough project to start with. I think it was a point-and-click adventure. Really nice game, very well reviewed on Steam with respect to user reviews. But probably not the right project for us to, if we'd been looking to make a big splash. Still, that did fine. But for Turing Test, that's a Portal-style game, a first-person puzzler, and a really nice-looking game as well. So, that was the one where I felt that we'd filled all the gaps in, tidied up all the loose ends, and everything kind of came together. So, yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of answering your question. But yeah, it's been great. We've really enjoyed working with the team.
We interviewed Bulkhead about the Turing test as well, and we reviewed the game, made our top list.
Oh, great!
Our colleague Pettyfan here especially liked it.
Yes, I did.
So
excellent.
Pretty good experience. Are you also working with Bulkhead to bring the game to the PlayStation 4, or are they working with somebody else there?
No, they actually self-published on consoles. So the way that we work at Collective is we really want to focus on where we add value to a team. We don't want to, kind of go in and take over elements of it where we don't need to. If we acted as publisher for Xbox and PlayStation, then we would be taking a cut of revenues. And in the instance where a developer doesn't need us to do that and they can do it themselves, then it makes no sense for us to take those revenues. And ultimately, our ambition with Collective is multiple things, but one of the key ones is trying to help to build sustainable businesses. But we feel that that's important for the industry, which is because it's such a fast-moving sector, and more stability, is a good thing. So for us, where a team doesn't need us to act as a publisher on certain platforms, then it just simply makes no sense to do so. It means that more revenue ultimately flows back to the developer instead of coming to us.
Makes sense, but it sounds like if they do need you, you would publish then?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have we've signed a number of games where we'll be the publisher across all platforms. It wasn't so much in this case that Bulkhead didn't believe in our ability to publish on console, but it's just that they already had existing relationships, specifically with Xbox, because their first game, which was out I think the year before or the 2 years before Turing Test, was called Numa, and they published that through ID at Xbox. So because they already had that relationship, they knew the folks at Xbox, it just made sense for them to kind of continue that, and they just didn't need another middleman in that particular instance. Most of the projects we work with, a lot of other teams won't have already shipped a game in that respect, so therefore if they don't have that relationship, that's where we can sort of step in and help them. And of course there are also some, I suppose not savings is the wrong word, but some efficiencies. How's that for a bit of corporate speak to be made? I mean, what we did with the Turing Test was we invested in the creation of things like key art and trailers and all that kind of thing, which helped to sell the game. Now, we obviously completely allow Bulkhead to reuse that content for their Xbox and PlayStation games. We're not going to say that they can't use the key art for their game because we're not going to earn from it because it's not related to the PC version. So, but of course, when you're putting a game out on across all consoles and PC at the same time, then actually what you're spending in terms of media, so in other words, in terms of advertising on websites or Twitch or wherever, if you're sort of integrating all the platforms, then actually you can sometimes get better results. In this case, we all agreed that it would make more sense ultimately for Bulkhead to not need that middleman. The level of efficiency, if you like, just didn't make it worthwhile for them, and that's fine by us.
Makes sense. Right. So moving onward to Black the Fall and Tokyo Dark. These are two games that were supposed to, if I'm recalling correctly, supposed to come out last year, but didn't. Is there any particular reason for why that happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard actually to pin release dates on games at this level a long way in advance. From our side, we don't see any value in telling a developer they must give us the precise release date. A lot of release dates for games that go through Kickstarter, that release date would have been estimated at the point that the Kickstarter launches, and that's way before that. We would have been appointed as publisher, assuming the developer wanted us to be publisher. So for
and then additionally for Kickstarter games, there's the moving target of what the game includes if it has stretch goals.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think for Black the Fall, the game was fairly consistent in terms of what they wanted to do in terms of scope. But yeah, I mean, we sort of came on board as the game's publisher, and we sort of worked with them. We see our job when we're working with teams as much as possible to not only provide a good sales platform and sort of help them to earn as much money as possible by bringing it to as big an audience as possible, but for us, we feel there's a really important responsibility with respect to advice and feedback. So we'll always try to help teams understand perhaps which parts of the game aren't holding together so well, if there are certain things they might do to that might have a good impact on things like reviews and ultimately sales. And so we work on that basis with all teams. Now if a team sees an opportunity, they think it's worth taking some extra time to add layers of polish or to change systems, then obviously, you know, it's perfectly fine for them to do that. Depending on whether or not, you know, ultimately they have the backing, the funding to, you know, the budget to actually be able to take that extra time. In the case of Black the Fall, you know, that was something they wanted to pursue, and they did source some additional funding from a private investor to allow them to do so. And candidly, you know, I think the results are going to be really clear. If anybody played the early demo of the game from Kickstarter and then compared that to, you know, perhaps if they saw it at one of the events we had it at last year, and then they'll compare that again to the game that releases, you know, later this year. Yeah, I think, well, the difference is very clear to see, and that's quite exciting, you know, to be able to help a team to do that, to give them really the benefits of advice and feedback. But ultimately, you know, it's important that it has to be the developer's choice, right? I mean, we're not going to force them to release a game before it's not ready. Similarly, you know, we're not going to force them to delay a game if they can't afford to do so, or they don't feel it's in their best interests. So with respect to Black the Fall and Tokyo Dark, both of those games have lengthened the dev cycles, essentially to make a better game, you know, to add more polish, to tidy up, neaten up some of the systems or the animation, you know, so that when they release, if you know, look at these teams, this is sort of 2+ years of work that has gone into both of those games respectively, and you know, from the developer's perspective, we want to try and help them do everything we can to optimize their chance for success. If the game goes well and you know, as well as it can do, then they've got a great chance to earn enough money to go on making games and make the next one and continue to be financially independent. And financial independence is another way of saying effectively creative independence. And again, you know, I think that's good for gamers. It means that people are more likely to continue to see new and unique games as opposed to perhaps relying on you know, on sort of franchises and sequels, which of course are also a very important part of the industry. But you know, we know that that video games as an industry sort of thrives on new ideas and diverse perspectives. So
yeah, that's definitely an important thing to consider, that even if it's not like part of the official agreement, if someone's paying for your stuff, you're going to change the things that they want changed or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, as I say, it's at the end of the day, we're not the IP owners. We don't take games from the developers through this process. So we're always very respectful of that. You know, they own the IP, they own the game they're making, and so, you know, it's our job to offer the best advice we can, but it's not our job to take creative control or make those decisions on behalf of developers. We, you know, we obviously take more control when it comes to marketing and sales decisions. You know, that's our job, kind of thing. But even then, you know, it's down to make sure that the developers will always approve marketing plans and always approve PR plans to make sure they're comfortable with how their game is being represented.
Sounds like a right decent way of doing things.
Well, we hope so. I think, you know, one of the things when we launched Collective, we knew we were up against was cynicism. You know, why is a big publisher doing this? How is Square Enix going to ruin crowdfunding and ruin indie development and steal the souls and you know, skim off money and that kind of thing? So, you know, we know that we have to take the right approach. We have to approach this with integrity and openness and transparency. So that's what we've tried to do. It's funny, somebody asked me the other day, actually, what was our kind of New Year's resolution for 2017 for Collective, and I think, I'm not sure it's a resolution, but one of my real hopes is that by the end of 2017, if you're familiar with the games that Collective publishes, then you will have a real understanding of what it is that Collective is here for. I think it's fair to say that perhaps that hasn't been super clear in the past couple of years, and people have, you know, maybe prejudged us a little, which is fine and not unfair. But I hope that, I've always felt that proof would be something that we have to show over a period of time, and I hope that by the end of this year we'll be able to hold our heads up and be considered as a valuable part of the indie game sector.
Well, it's especially interesting in these times because the indie landscape is not so much changing as it's getting ever bigger, ever larger, and it's getting harder for indie titles to stand out without some sort of beacon, if you will.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what we've hit is a point in the industry's history now where it's never been easier to actually make a game. The tools are available readily and free. The distribution platforms are available readily and pretty easily accessible to people with respect to things like Steam. And there's tutorials, there are courses, there's education. If you want to make a game, there are ways that you can do it without, you can put a lot of effort into it or you can put a little bit, but the point is the barriers are very, very low. So what that means is that, a lot of people love video games. It's an amazing industry to be in, and to be a games developer has become a real aspirational thing, which is fantastic. I think the best chance for that diversity of perspective I mentioned is if everybody is making games. That's brilliant. That's very exciting, but it does bring a challenge, and that challenge is the noise. If everybody's releasing games, then we've seen it on Steam. The number of games released each year has increased massively, particularly in the last couple of years. And so, as an individual game, how do you compete against the noise? How do you stand out? To be fair, we see it with everything. Where there is a bit of success, oftentimes we'll see a gold rush follow. And it's no different with the indie scene. Sort of 6-7 years ago, we saw that the pioneers, people like Mike Biffle and Phil Fish and Jonathan Blow and so on, and that inspired people, and it showed people that it was possible for individuals or small teams to make games to have success. But now how do you stand out? I think there's still multiple routes to awareness. We certainly don't claim that we're the best or the only route, and we're certainly not trying to be competitive with indie publishers or indies that are trying to self-publish. But we do believe it's important for there to be multiple routes, and there are so many games out there. There's so many good games with talented teams. Most often new teams, people who have maybe just graduated or maybe working on their first ever game. And I do think that it's important for key players in the industry to take a role and responsibility in nurturing that talent. If a team comes along and they get a deal with someone like Devolver, or they manage to get an opportunity to go through ID at Xbox, fantastic. We don't want to poach those people away and sort of cause downside in this particular ecosystem. But can we find other teams that maybe haven't got those opportunities and then help them to have certainly enough success to go on and keep making games? We see a lot of teams that they don't even get to release their first game because they just run out of money or opportunity. And a lot of teams that do get to release their first game simply don't earn enough to go on and make the second. Now, the paradox there is that in order to get better and improve, you have to keep shipping games, because every game you ship is this amazing amount of experience that will improve you as a team and as an individual. But if you don't get the chance to keep shipping games, how do you learn? How do you get better? It's a little bit chicken and egg. So yeah, that's our ambition, I suppose, is how can we help teams to sort of beat that noise a little bit and just help a few more keep their heads above water.
Definitely. There are multiple routes. There are not just multiple indie publishers. There are PR firms that I work with and all that stuff. But the overall point is, just being a good game isn't necessarily enough to get you noticed. No,
it's not. Which again, is an interesting thing I've certainly seen in the past few years, that the quality bar has definitely increased. I think that's, again, it's a good thing. It's I think we're seeing better skilled people, or I should say people with better skills. I think people are learning more and more from each other. I think that people aren't having to sort of learn for themselves and figure it all out anymore. There are good engines out there where there's multitudes of tutorials and plugins and ways to actually increase quality. Does that make it harder again for new people coming in? Yes, it does, because instead of, let's say the bar was 50% quality 3-4 years ago, now it's maybe 75 or 80% quality, and people have to keep literally improving their game to be able to compete. But I think that's just the nature of things. There's nothing that we can do about that, really. I think that's just the way things go as people get more and more used to the tools.
Would make sense. Getting back to Tokyo Dark and Black to Fall, what is the current status of these two games?
So they are both slated for a 2017 release. We're actually getting pretty close now with Black to Fall. We haven't announced an exact release date yet, but we'll be doing so very soon. Tokyo Dark is going to fall a little later in the year, but there's no concerns. It's as I say, it's really just about sort of adding some layers of polish. We've got, but I mean, those are not the only two games coming out for us this year. We're actually planning on releasing 7 games in total. A bunch of those aren't yet announced, so I can't share them with you. But in terms of the ones that you may be aware of, we have Oh My Godheads, which is a 2 versus 2 local multiplayer game, and that's coming along really nicely. And also we have Fear Effect Sedna, of course, which is from the same developers as Goetia. And that was the Fear Effect IP that we've talked about previously, in fact, and also Forgotten Anne, which we debuted at the EGX event in Birmingham in the UK last, I want to say September, October. I forget exactly which month it was now, but yeah. So we've got some very exciting titles, plus a few more that we haven't actually announced yet. And it's definitely going to be an interesting sort of next 12 months.
Sounds like it. Anyway, I want to zero in on Forgotten Anne because we haven't talked about this one yet.
No.
So, for those who might not know what the game is, what is it all about?
So this one's, I have to say, it's really worth going and checking out a video on this one because the visuals are absolutely gorgeous. It's about a character called Anne who is what's called a forgotling, and the story is that her and her master are trying to find their way back to the sort of the normal universe, but they're sort of stuck in this realm. And I don't want to sort of spoil too much about the story. There's a lot that kind of goes in there. We have announced a teaser trailer which just hints at some of the storyline, but the game itself is a side-scrolling sort of RPG, and as I say, it's definitely worth checking out. The visuals are very, very sweet, and it's got a lovely story too. So we'll be talking a lot more about that. Probably in the second half of this year, and revealing a little bit more about the characters and the storyline and so on. But we're super excited about this one. We think, particularly for fans of Square Enix, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Indeed. And what kind of game is it? Is it a platformer?
Yeah, it's a I guess you'd call it a platform. It's not super kind of. It's not like a timing-based platformer where kind of twitch skills come in important. It's more of a sort of adventure, I guess you'd call it. You've got sort of puzzles to solve and stuff like that. But in terms of the mechanics of how you get about and explore, then it's a 2D platformer kind of mechanic.
In terminology, I believe they call that a Metroidvania.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. That's a fair description.
I now it may not be official, but it's just the shorthand everyone knows.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
And yeah, I've seen the teaser trailer, and it looks stunning. Like, is this like hand-drawn animation?
It is, yeah, and I think the interesting thing is, and we obviously intentionally set it up this way. When you watch the trailer, you sort of start off with some obvious cutscenes that kind of set up the story a little bit, and then you sort of see Anne lying down on her bed. It's a sort of a top-down view, and you kind of zoom in, and the expectation is that people, are supposed to think that that's still part of the cutscene, but in fact, actually, at that point, we've moved into in-game visuals, and as Anne sort of gets up and starts to wander around, you realise that is actually the in-game art style, and it was lovely when we actually debuted it on the PlayStation Access stage at EGX, and we had a great response. I was sort of in the crowd for it when the trailer was being played, and once people realised that was actually the in-game visual style, there was a little bit of a sort of collective intake of breath, and it was really satisfying actually from our side to see that happen. So we had the developers up there talking a little bit about the game, and Holly Bennett was hosting it, and I think she's already become a big fan of that particular project. So yeah, we've got high hopes for that game. But what I would say beyond that is that the team are absolutely fantastic. Alfred Ngoyan is the head of Throughline Games, and he's actually got a background in film direction, and I think that really comes through in that a lot of the scenes in the game are quite filmic. A lot of the way that shots are set up and created, I think as you play through the game, you'll really sort of feel very more sort of immersed in the story because of that particular style. And they're a great team. They're clearly very talented, and I mean, as with all the teams we work with, we're trying to help find new talent and trying to help that talent then thrive and flourish. And certainly, I'm pretty convinced that Throughline Games has got a very, very strong place in the industry in the future.
I'm like, it's definitely it's one of the best looking 2D games I've seen. Like. Although I imagine it's very ambitious, if they're doing everything, with like 2D hand-drawn animation, like. Yeah,
it's hard. I mean, it's hard work, and there's a lot of skill and dedication that goes into something like that. Last year let me think. I think it was maybe May. I went over to Copenhagen, which is where they're based, en route to the Nordic Game Conference, in fact, and popped in to say hello. And I think at that point, for the first time, they had the whole game storyboarded along this wall, in sort of left to right, and then the next layer down, left to right, and it was amazing to see it all out like that. Yeah, I know it sounds obvious, but it's moments like that where you realise just how much planning has to go into something. Even when you are sort of working on something that I guess we've got some games like Tokyo Dark has a lot of branching narrative. There's a lot of different permutations as to how that game's going to play out depending on the decisions you make. With Forgotten Anne, and I think generally sort of most narrative-led RPGs are a little bit more linear, but even then, the number of scenes and the amount of attention to detail that you have to put into a game is pretty spectacular. And I mean, in the end, that's reflected in the amount of time it takes.
Indeed. Well, when I see this game, do you know of a game called Owlboy?
Yes.
Yeah, it reminds me of that.
Yeah, I can see why you'd say that. Yeah.
And I'm
it's another lovely game.
Yeah, if you know the production history, that took like 6-8 years to create.
I'm not familiar with the length, but I can well believe it. But I think that the great thing for Throughline is they've got a lot of talented artists there. They're still a small team. They're still an indie team, and but yeah, they've got a great work ethic and fabulous dedication.
No doubt, no doubt. So, how did you first get into contact with Fragments? How did you find this game?
Well, that was actually in 2015, and it was actually at Nordic Game. So Nordic Game, a lot of people probably won't have heard of it, but what you have over the course of the year is a lot of developer conferences dotted around in different places. And these are basically events where developers and publishers and middleware and PR companies and, everybody that has a role in the industry will go to one of these events and, kind of chat and meet and do business. Probably the most famous one is GDC, of course, which is the big one happening in San Francisco in a few weeks. But you have a lot of smaller, more regional events, and Nordic Game is one of those. It takes place in in Malmo, which is right on the southern tip of Sweden. It's actually just over the bridge from Copenhagen, and which is Denmark. And you get about sort of 15 or 1600 people there. It's a pretty long-standing event now, very well known in Europe. I've been going there on and off for many years actually. Originally as a journalist, and then sort of more recently, as part of Collective. We just we met with them. We have like a meeting system where it's like a sort of speed dating, I guess, for people to kind of meet up and exchange notes on their projects and see if people are interested. And I have to say, as soon as they showed me, they had a sort of a much more basic version of the teaser trailer that wasn't narratively quite different, but it had the same effect. Very, very immediate. I just looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And from that moment on, it was, well, the first instance actually wasn't about signing the game to Collective. It was actually about putting them in contact with some other people that I know well, that that was sort of looking to invest into stuff, but also to help teams with just general business advice and sort of incubation. It's a company called Execution Labs based in Montreal, and my first instinct was to sort of try and hook those guys up, and that sort of turned out pretty well. And then when they were, we sort of kept talking a bit in background about the possibility of publishing, and in the end it worked out. So we're very, very happy to be working with those guys.
No doubt. Now this game is coming to the PC and the PlayStation 4, correct?
That's right. Yes.
I think. It might not necessarily be the first Square Enix Collective title on consoles, but it's the first indie title that it isn't an owned IP, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, well, Black the Fall will also be on. In fact, Black the Fall will be on PS4 and Xbox One, and that'll be that'll be a little earlier in the year. Forgotten Anne will be PS4 and PC. And I think actually, I think I mentioned it was the end of 2017. I think it's going to be early 2018.
Right.
I
suppose there's a system I should ask about, but not so much professionally. But do you have any personal thoughts on the Nintendo Switch, since it's currently the hot topic in the industry?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Well, I could probably answer professionally and personally. For all intents and purposes, they're probably the same answer. In fact, I mean, we don't have any specific plans to put any games out on Switch. That's not because we're not interested. It's just, I think when devs at this level are working on a game, they will start off with certain platforms in mind. And at this point, we just haven't had enough information to be able to, see if any of the projects will be appropriate for Switch and sort of how that process would work. So, I think there's going to be a little bit of time while developers sort of figure out what they need to do to be able to port to that platform. It's, I guess, watch this space, but we've not sort of had any specific discussions at this point. On a personal level, I mean, I think, I'm really glad to see the excitement that there is around the Switch, because I think Nintendo is such an important part of the industry. They I'm sure I speak for a lot of people when I think about how important they are to people's childhoods, right? I mean, it's the strength of the franchises and those iconic moments. I think they do things differently to the other platform holders, and I suppose candidly, sometimes that works better than others. But I think it's super important that we have a third player on the platform side that isn't just about focusing on constantly pushing technology in the way that Sony and Microsoft do. That's super cool, but they're focused on different things. And again, this is a key element when we look at the meaning of games. I'm a strong believer that meaning comes from difference. So if Nintendo were to try to do the same thing as Sony and Microsoft, I'm not sure that's really worthwhile for gamers, frankly. So we'll see. I think there's a lot of stuff to be seen. How well it's received and what sort of sales that it does. But I think it's exciting, and I'm really, really happy to see people respond to it well.
It sounds about right. I mean, and it's kind of in line with other people I've talked to about the Switch. And, people are excited for it, but they don't necessarily know a lot about it in terms of like developing for it yet.
At least the people who aren't, prophesying doom in the end of gaming as we know it because Nintendo did anything.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess some people kind of like to get caught up in the whole system wars thing. But, on the other hand, I suppose sometimes people have expectations, and if something, an announcement doesn't hit those expectations, then people can be disappointed. But I think there's a few notable things. Primarily, the talk of Unity, sort of being one of the engines supported by Switch. To be honest, I don't know the full details on that, or sort of how embedded that is at this point. But if that's accurate, I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of games out there which I think would have a real natural home on Nintendo platforms, which really haven't been possible, and they've ended up, I guess, finding a natural home on something like Steam, because it's been more accessible in the past. So I think it's exciting, potentially for teams we work with on Collective, but I think for big teams and small teams alike. So I'm looking forward to release day and sort of seeing. I think 2017 is going to be an interesting one to look back on for sure.
Yeah, it's like I do know that Unity is supported on the Switch and UE4 is supported on the Switch.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives them options. It opens up suddenly to a whole range of possible games that it's going to make. Again, particularly for small teams, the cost and the resource needed to put games on Switch should, and I use that word advisedly because, as I say, the precise ins and outs, from my side at least, are still TBC, but it should make that a whole lot easier. And I think, I think in the end, the more choice for gamers that adopt, the early adopters of consoles, I think the better experience they'll have. So, but as I say, it's still early days, and we'll see how that goes. But I think it's exciting.
Indeed. And shifting over to Fear Effect Sedna, how's this game coming along? I recall reading some months ago that that a new company is helping out with the development of the game.
Yeah, that's right. We wanted to do something a little bit different with this one, or I should say, the developers were keen to I think try to find sort of different angles and new angles, things to try, and they met with a company called Forever Entertainment based in Poland. They're actually a publisher themselves, and they struck up a good relationship, and what it does, it enables them to bring extra expertise to the table, particularly with respect to things like marketing and that side of things. So, they've got a good track record with with the projects that they've published themselves. And yeah, I think they were obviously interested in working with the Sushi team, and also on the Fear Effect IP. So it's a slightly different relationship for us, but we're very excited about that game. We actually, watching the sort of the milestone builds come in for us to check out and see the progress. It's making leaps and bounds in terms of progress, and the style of the game is obviously different from the original Fear Effect games, I think we talked about that previously in terms of when you're looking at budgets, there are certain games that they're going to be easier easier, less expensive to develop for, and a sort of full-on first or third-person projects are generally more expensive or more costly in terms of resource. So switching up to that sort of isometric Shadowrun style game, pausable real time, allowing that elements of strategy but also action. It's going to be really interesting to see what people make of it. But I'm pretty excited. The quality is looking good, and again, we'll be announcing release date for that in the coming. Can I say weeks? Weeks / a low number of months. So it's going to be good to see how that one goes down as well.
Indeed. And if this is successful, do you think this will revive the IP idea?
Well, I think when we looked at what we wanted to achieve by opening up the old IDOS IP, primarily it was to give developers a bit of a step up, simply because reviving an existing IP probably gives you a bit of a shortcut to awareness than trying to create and launch a completely new IP. So for us, it's really less about somehow kind of reviving a franchise and then sort of seeing how far we can milk it, versus is it just something else we can do to try and give some sort of competitive advantage for the developer that's working on it. So yeah, we look at something like Fear Effect, and with Sedna, if it does well, there's no reason not to continue that relationship, and I think we'd obviously want to talk to Sushi about that first and foremost. But even if it doesn't, we still have other IP that is dormant that people are always welcome to pitch on. I get asked quite a bit about Gex, but the truth is nobody has actually submitted a credible pitch for the game. And what I mean by credible is a sort of an active and working development studio. We had a few sort of scripts in from people who remember it fondly, but for this particular element of the initiative, we're not sort of soliciting ideas for us to go make the game. We really are trying to open it up so that devs can come along and hopefully benefit from that association.
Makes sense, especially since in order to make a new game, you kind of have to have the capabilities to make a new game.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm not saying that you've got to have like a 15-person studio lying dormant in wait, but certainly if you're going to pitch on something, then you need to be in a position where, first of all, you know what it takes to make that game, and you've got a plan to put together that team. Usually it's probably easier for a team coming off a project or winding one particular project down to start pitching and with the sort of forward planning to then move on to that project if the pitch goes well, rather than someone kind of building a team completely from scratch. What I would say is that funding is always going to be an issue. We don't have like a big pot of cash to kind of throw a new Fear Effect or a new Gex game. So while we're happy to support a concept through Kickstarter or something like that, or we're happy for teams to go off and find, they may have funding of their own, or they may, there may be people who want to come in and sort of invest into that project. That's probably another challenge I would say that means it's not necessarily a super easy proposal, but it's there, and if the situation is right and there's a team that's interested, then it's available for people to sort of come in and talk to us about.
This might be part of the, if you will, the downswing of being called the Square Enix Collective, because when people see the Square Enix name, they think the big publisher. They think this is going to be a new game that you guys are funding or whatever, and the lines could get blurred in that regard.
I think that's fair. I think part of that would sort of comes from perhaps I think as an industry we're not particularly good at talking about how the industry works. So very, very, very simply, in order to make a game, you've got to have money, because you've got to buy licenses, you've got to pay rent, you've obviously got to pay your staff, and you're going to be doing that for 1+ years, I guess. So that budget's got to come from somewhere. Now, as a developer, if you have the money to make a game and you have your own IP, the absolute ideal is you don't need to take any money from anywhere, which means that when you put your game on sale, you keep all of the net revenue that you receive. Okay, so you earn 100% of that net revenue. If you're putting something out on Steam or selling it in shops, of course the retailer will also always take a cut. But apart from that, everything comes to you, and that's the ideal situation. If you're going to work with an investor or a publisher who's going to actually invest money into a project on the production side, and actually going to help fund that staff, that rent, that those licenses and all the rest of it, depending on the proportion of budget they give you. So if you need $1 million to make a game and somebody gives you $1 million to make it, that means that investor or that publisher is taking all the risk. Now, risk is really the currency as much as actual dollars, because you've got to have a reason to take risk. Now, the worst case scenario as a publisher is you could invest $1 million and the game may never be finished, or the game may be finished, but it may never sell a unit. So you've got to be prepared to lose that money. Now, obviously, when you're looking at a project and you're looking at a team, you've got to be pretty confident that's not going to happen, because no one in their right mind would go in and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if we lose $1 million, that's fine. So you have to make that judgment call. But in order to make that risk worthwhile, you have to make sure the benefit of putting that money in is clear. If you put money in a high interest bank account, I mean, maybe perhaps not so much right now, but a few years ago when interest rates were reasonable, you put $1 million in the bank for 2 years. You don't want to put that same money into video game development and end up making less money. It makes no sense. So you've got to really know that the deal has got to be balanced, so that if you're going to invest $1 million and take all of the risk, it's got to be worth your while. So that means you're going to take a higher proportion of the revenue that comes in for sales. In fact, if you're funding 100% of the game, you may take a very high proportion of that. You may take the IP and other things, because you sort of have to say, well, obviously the developer's making the game, but if we're paying for all of that process to happen, then effectively, it's almost like a work for hire kind of process. Now, the less, therefore, you need to take from other people in terms of the proportion of the total budget, the more strength you have in the negotiation. So if you only need 10% of the development budget, that puts you in a very strong position. And it means that when it comes to that, the money, the income from sales, you'll get a much stronger proportion of it. And absolutely, you shouldn't even be thinking about talking about who owns IP, because nobody else would have a right to it. There's a lot of nuances. Some investors will look at taking a slice of your company instead of specifically a game. Publishers, I think, tend to prefer to look at look at it on a project by project basis. But in the end, different parts of the chain fulfill different purposes. For us, if we're just publishing a game and we're not investing into production, then we're still taking a level of risk, because we're going to be funding all of the marketing and all of the QA and all of the age rating stuff, and all of that has a cost. So we've got to be confident that we're going to not just recoup the money we spend, but ultimately, we do want to make a profit on that as well. But it's a balance when it comes to the IP stuff. So to kind of, having explained that, to get back to your point about, should Square Enix fund, the Fear Effect game or a Gex game? Well, we could. There's no reason for us not to. But if we do that, what is it that the developer's actually bringing? If we're funding the game, it's our IP, then, I mean, it's almost charity if we're going to give developers a reasonable cut of the profits, because, we're taking all of the risk. And in the end, I mean, we could just have an internal team make a game, right? I mean, there's not really a viable reason for us to want to pursue that. The idea behind this is that we want to limit what we take out of that game, pretty much to just publishing and, sort of just, I guess, a licensing fee. But we want the developer to be the majority earner in terms of that net revenue. And in order to do that, that means that we're really not looking to fund that particular production. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a sliding scale. The more we put in as a publisher, the more we'll end up taking out. So because we want this to be weighted in favor of the developers, we need to put in, I don't want to say as little as possible, but we want to make sure certainly the balance of what's coming out is going to be in favor of the developer. Otherwise, there's not really a lot of point in us making the IPs available.
It makes sense for business reasons, at least.
Well, and that's I mean, if we wanted to be charitable, then yeah, I mean, we could just put money in a big pot and say, hey, we're going to donate money to a developer to sort of have a play around with a particular franchise. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but ultimately we're a business. I think, and it's probably, I'm sure it's a sort of a line you'll hear a lot, but we're a listed company. We are legally responsible to shareholders, and we do have to be responsible with the money we're investing. If there was a billionaire who owned an IP and just wanted to toss it out there and kind of give some people a bunch of cash to experiment, then that'd be awesome. I mean, that would be fantastic. But that's not what this is. It's a business opportunity that we want to try to create in order to, make it worthwhile for developers. We're pretty open about how developers find funding. We're happy to support things like a Kickstarter campaign to help them do that, as we did with Fear Effect Sedna, so that they'll end up getting the majority benefit. But yeah, it's not, and I think we've been pretty clear from the start that it's not something we're looking to sort of put Square Enix money behind. I think if we were going to do that, we would probably need to believe in those IPs enough to sort of probably go big and develop them internally. As it is, we have active IPs like Tomb Raider and Final Fantasy and Hitman and Just Cause, and we have dormant IPs like Gex and until recently Fear Effect. So our sort of theory was the dormant IPs, we have no plans to do anything with them ourselves. Can they be useful to others? And that was really the starting point.
Well, here's a question: has anyone offered to say buy the Gex franchise?
No, no.
I'm speaking hypothetically here. It's like
nobody's. So I mean, not to my knowledge anyway. I don't know if somebody made a credible offer. I don't know. That's definitely wouldn't be my call to make. I mean, that would be sort of CEO level sort of decision. But yeah, who knows? I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate if something like that would be accepted or not.
Fair enough. Not necessarily Gex, but I'm sure there are dormant IPs that people out there would want or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, I know that offers have been made on franchises in the past, and I think we look on things on a case by case basis. Again, I can't speak to the decisions and the decision makers. I could give you my assumption, and I would imagine, it would be looked at if sort of we think that there is at some point potential, either through licensing or development of a particular IP, then we've probably got no real reason to sell. I mean, if somebody made a ridiculous offer that was sort of almost too good to turn down, I don't know, maybe that would be different. But I think one thing that's important to note is that certainly bigger companies do rely on, I think, having a portfolio strategy. I think we're sort of seeing that there are going to be times when certain franchises perhaps become more tired, and if you have a lot of different things that you can sort of reinvigorate or bring to the fore at different times, then that's maybe a good long-term strategy. I think Bethesda's an interesting company. They've got a lot of outstanding IP, and they're creating new stuff as well as bringing other stuff back. I mean, the Elder Scrolls series is obviously absolutely phenomenal, and I'm a huge fan of that since the very early days of that series. But then they come along with something like Dishonored, and launch something entirely new, and I was super excited to play Dishonored 2 last year and sort of go back into that world. So yeah, I mean, I think different things come and go at different times, and sometimes I think big companies will look at some of that dormant stuff and say to themselves, well, who knows? I mean, there may be some things that we might have plans for in 5, 6, 7 years, but now isn't necessarily the right time. It's very, very hard to plan that kind of, I mean, 5 years in the games industry is a massively long time. So much stuff will happen in that period. So it's hard to do that sort of level of long-term planning. But I think, often you'd look at it and say, well, do we need to sell it? Could there be something in the future? And that's probably how the sort of factors that decision would be made on.
Sounds about right. Right. So, what's going on with your crowdfunding plans?
Well, we had a slightly quieter 2016 than we were expecting. In the end, it was really down to scheduling. I think we only supported 4 projects across the year. I think normally we'd expect to do sort of 7 or 8. So we wanted to tighten things up for this year, and we started already with a game called Undungeon, which is a really awesome sort of top-down platformer. I suppose it sort of reminds me quite a lot of Hyper Light Drifter in terms of visual style and the sort of the action involved. Really interesting background to it, some cool kind of setup. Feels quite unique. And they're looking for €50,000. Really interesting team based in Eastern Europe. And I think at the moment, as we talk now, they're up around the 46,000 euros mark. So they're pretty close to their target, and they've still got a good couple of weeks to go yet. So pretty excited to see them hit their target and sort of see how far we can push them beyond those stretch goals. We're already looking at the next one, which I can't share those details with you right now, but we do want to try to sort of fit in, 7 or 8 projects this year, as long as we feel that the crowdfunding environment will support that. Again, one thing I'd say is that when we first started supporting Kickstarters or crowdfunding projects in general, I think it's fair to say that I had an expectation that as we got more experience, things would become easier. I'm not sure that's been the case. I think we've learned a lot, and we definitely have a better process for supporting these things now. We know how to try to maximize opportunities, but I think we're sort of watching quite closely what the overall level of interest is in crowdfunding, and we'll just sort of continue. I mean, we obviously we put a lot into each of these campaigns. I mean, we asked for 5% of the net crowd funds raised, so that's around 4% of whatever the developer total is, assuming it's the target. And that's that's not enough for us to cover our costs. That's not really a big deal for us, because we're doing it to try to help developers raise funds. But I think if we sort of saw a situation where the sort of crowdfunding ecosystem was maybe shrinking, or it wasn't enough to realistically believe that we can help teams to hit their targets, then obviously we'd look again at whether or not it was practical to continue. But I don't think that's what we're looking at right now. But crowdfunding has been very volatile in the past few years, and I think it's very hard to predict exactly which direction it's going to go in.
Right, and so finally, are there any, I don't know, proper, I guess, Square Enix Europe games that you wish to discuss at this point?
Well, personally, I'm super excited that Kingdom Hearts 2.8 is out today. That's something I've been looking forward to, and particularly because my own children now are at the age where they're massively into Disney, and so I sort of see it as a great opportunity to also introduce them to Square Enix characters now, and it's got some great games in there. So that's personally speaking, very excited about that.
Yeah, 2.0 is the.
Not for long with.
I was gonna say 2.8 is the one with the 3DS one, the like cutscenes from the mobile one, and then basically the rest of Birth by Sleep.
Yes, exactly.
So
there's, yeah. I mean, personally, I'm collecting them all, so so this is a really nice addition. But then, and I was going to say, not before long, we've got the Hitman box, which again I'm very excited by. I mean, I know a lot of people were maybe sort of the jury was out for them on whether or not the whole episodic thing would work. I mean, I'm not really objective, so believe me if you will, or don't. But I really enjoyed the episodic stuff. I really enjoyed jumping into the different targets, the elusive targets, sort of seeing that story build. I actually find it really hard to play. If the Hitman game was only released in one box, there's virtually no chance that I would complete that game in the space of a couple of weeks. And I mean, I talked about Dishonored 2, how much I was looking forward to that game. I still haven't completed it. I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through, and just through life and other things, I keep going back, every couple of weeks and do a bit more. So for me, that episodic thing was perfect because you jump in, do a few hours, one day, kind of go back to it a little bit, every so often. I suppose for me, it sort of reminded me a little bit of how World of Warcraft has evolved. So, you kind of go in, you do your daily quests, then, a couple of times a week, you might sort of go in and do world bosses or your guild raids or whatever. But you don't, I think after a certain point of time, once you've hit that level cap, you don't go in every day and sort of play loads. You sort of keep coming back and keep kind of jumping in and out. And so it sort of felt familiar in that respect. But that said, I mean, it's just an excuse to go through and play through the whole thing again with the box. So, yeah, pretty sure I won't finish it though in anytime soon.
All right. Once again, Phil, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and joining us and giving us updates on what the collective's been doing.
You're welcome. Thanks. Once again for having me. It's always a pleasure, and very, very, as I say, very happy to be one of those emerging familiar faces.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear, and we'll certainly catch up with you probably later on in the year when you've got more announced projects that you can talk about.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's loads to come for Collective, and I'd be interested to see what you make of some of the stuff we're going to be announcing for sure.
Indeed. Right, so that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in for our what we're now calling alpha episodes. Our Wednesday shows are the main shows. We'll be welcoming Kurt Lodi, honestly not sure how he pronounces his last name, of the Dragon Moth, and we'll be talking about a game called Hellenica Tactics, a recently released strategy RPG that just came out on Steam, I think today, or really recent. And until such time, I wish you good games.